Moving on to more psychology, we're talking about, now we're getting into the self. Quoting the great Thomas Sawes, people often say that this or that person has not yet found himself, but the self is not something one finds, it is something one creates. Here again, Thomas Sawes understands that the self, by design, is divine and empowered. So one doesn't find himself by looking outside. One creates himself by his own unique power. Thomas Sawes again, in the animal kingdom, the rule is eat or be eaten. In the human kingdom, it is defined or be defined, referring again to the power of our own definitions of self within ourselves. The great English poet William Blake, what is now proved was once only imagined, meaning all of our ideas, everything that we see, lasers, computers, cars, rocket ships, they all came from within the divine mind of man. They all started as ideas. I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason or compare. My business is to create. Again, referring to the sovereign principle of creativity, creating your own empowered self. If I don't create my own system, I will by default be enslaved by another man's. This is society's. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear as it is to man, as it is infinite. As it is infinite. Carl Jung, great psychologist who studied underneath Sigmund Freud, speaking of consciousness, there's no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. He's referring here to the nature of consciousness being rooted in pain because of our own neurotic behavior, our own fears, and the way in which around them is to commit to the path of selfhood, to go into the darkness and face the fear. In the words of Christ, saying a similar thing, Jesus Christus said, when you see your likeness, you rejoice. This is a reflection of yourself, an affirmation that you exist. But when you see your images which came into existence before you, which neither die nor are made manifest, how much will you bear? Incredibly esoteric and encoded statement. Which neither die nor are made manifest, which means they're not manifested, they're not material, but you can still see them. You can still see with your mind's eye or with your spirit. These are profound philosophical or psychological truths that we can become aware of, the infinite. When you see your likeness, you rejoice. It makes us feel comfortable. But when you see your images which came into existence before you, so this is consciousness before man took form. And there's no reason other than foolishness to think that there wasn't consciousness, that the universe wasn't conscious before we were here. Of course it was. How was it? I don't know. There's no way to know. I'm only privy to it since man became man. Schwaller de Lubicz echoes this again. With man, the return begins, the liberation from consciousness, from formal or corporeal, meaning the body, contingencies, and the move back towards conscious incorporeal being, which is immortality. So, conscious and not in the body being which is immortal. With the human being, nature enters into the phase of material disintegration. For you as an individual, there is that which precedes you individually, and that which precedes you in general evolution. The same thing that Jesus was saying. Because beyond and greater than you are the immortal consciousnesses of the saints and masters. Through consciousness, the universe is but one single thing. All is interdependent with all. He's talking about the immortality of being. Man has the ability, a divine awareness through our creativity to experience immortality in the body. That is what is known as resurrection. If it happens after you've dropped the body, then it's not made conscious. It's only in the form of the body that things become conscious. This is how consciousness evolves form. Carl Jung, just reiterating the archetypes of the collective consciousness. The contents of the collective unconscious are archetypes, primordial images or symbols that reflect the basic patterns that are common to us all and which have existed universally since the dawn of time. So these archetypes exist before man becomes man, and man can become aware of them by stepping into eternity, stepping into immortality. Pretty massive, huh? People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their souls. This is Carl Jung again. And so I would just point to the question, why don't we know this? Why don't we know we are eternal? Where have we gone wrong again? We've fallen off center. We've fallen away from our own inner being fully conscious, or being conscious of the whole, of infinity, of spirit, the spiral. This is the wife of R.A. Schwaller-de-Lubeck's, and she is incredible in her own right. I think she only wrote one book, but man, one of the top 10 best books I've ever read in my entire life. It's called The Opening of the Way. Isha Schwaller-de-Lubeck's, talking about the vital fire. The fire reacts to instinctive forces only, be they in their animal or spiritual aspect. The mutual relation between these two poles, if controlled and directed consciously and wisely, will cause vitality and vital consciousness to awaken and grow. The petty persons of this world have called one of these poles virtue and the other vice, but the man who, in order to satisfy them, obeys one and denies the other, will find himself suspended in the void. For, as in magnetism, to abolish one pole is to abolish both. It is the negation of life, the refusal of redemption for fear of committing a fault. Unity consciousness. You can't go through, she's basically saying that you can't go through reality in a fragmentary way and become awakened, or become a man of knowledge, or become immortal. Isha continues, the body houses the consciousness, but consciousness creates the form, which is what Plato said as well. The body is the house made of clay and water, but it can become a magnet for the spirit. And one would never guess how impetuously the spirit rushes into a body which opens itself to receive it. Everything comes to him who has the courage to lose himself in order to find the universe. The abyss does not swallow him up. It is he who expands into the abyss. The body is the temple. Carl Jung, if things go wrong in the world, this is because something is wrong with me, the individual. If I am sensible, I shall put myself right first. For this I need, because I need no outside authority, so I need a knowledge of the innermost foundations of my being, in order that I may base myself firmly on the eternal facts of the human psyche. Just purely, just psychologically talking about coming from center, a place not of the pseudo-self, a place of the sovereign self, the knowledge of my innermost foundations of being. I shall need no outside authority. I am that I am. And he says here how consciousness is specular again, meaning our approach to it is reflected back to us. When an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside of you as fate. So, we are still aware of some of these situations, or on some level, when things happen to us. We go, oh, this odd thing happened to me, and it made my life turn in a certain direction. And only later do we connect the dots cognitively and see the synchronicities. And when it's made conscious, do we see that it was actually an inner situation, not an outer situation. Our outer situations are actually born and started from within. And Ishishwara Ludwig's talking about what the inner kingdom is inside the temple. The aim of every tradition of wisdom is to gain the keys of the inner kingdom. I'll say that again. The aim of every tradition of wisdom is to gain the keys of the inner kingdom. For to hold that is the key to the kingdom of heaven, which is a kingdom not of this earth. But the man who seeks it has his feet on the ground, and his body is his instrument. His personal form is the obstacle he must overcome. But the will to light reveals from time to time the secret being within. The true name of that being, though unknown to its bearer, is the thread that binds together all his existences. And its consciousness is the divine kingdom, in which the human personality becomes the servant of its immortal self. Not only is she saying that the human body is the temple that houses God, houses the immortal spirit, the infinite spirit, but that light, and that light is referring to a light of consciousness or awareness, is the immortal self that the personality, right, the ego, the persona, has to willingly commit and align with in order to experience immortality. And understand here that the ego has been talismanic, has been talismanized. The ego is not, as we've been taught, this evil or dark thing. The ego is divine. If it wasn't, this wouldn't even be possible. The ego is and has been created as a self-conscious navigator in order to survive. So yes, it's activated by fear, but it is not evil. It is divine. It literally keeps one alive and trotting on. Moving on to the works of Walter Russell, and if you haven't read Walter Russell, you have to. Walter Russell's Russellian science will change your entire physics paradigm forever, as long as you suspend your current belief and track with it and follow it. He's incredible. He's one of the founders of the electric universe model, along with Nikola Tesla and Victor Schauberger and a few others. All knowledge exists. All mankind can have it for his asking. It is within man, awaiting his awareness of its all presence. Knowledge cannot be acquired by the brain from without. It must be recollected from within the consciousness of self, gradually dawning consciousness, awareness. Again, it has to start from within the self or the soul. Walter Russell, in The Secret of Light, knowledge can be obtained by man only through awareness of the spirit within him. Lack of that awareness is the tragedy of today's civilization. The underlying law of creation is rhythmic, balanced, interchanged in all transactions in nature. It is the one principle upon which the continuity of the universe depends. So rhythmic, balanced interchange. Likewise, it is the one principle on which the continuity of man's transactions, his health and happiness depends. It is the manifestation of God's two opposing desires and all processes of creation. Balance is the principle of unity. I'll say that again. Balance is the principle of unity or wholeness. And it is the stability in which lies in cause. Balance is the foundation of the universe. The one verse, with all of its myriad of forms, its foundation is balance. Cause, balance, rhythmic, interchange. And Walter Russell again, a philosopher, mathematician, master sculptor, master horseman, inventor. He invented quite a few things. States, everything created by man first exists as a universal principle, which is perfect in nature and imperfectly worked out by man. These are some of his drawings. This is a huge topic. I won't really go into it too much, but the electric universe model is based on geometric forms, just like our atomic model is based on geometric forms. The difference is that Walter Russell's forms are the forms that we find in nature that are constantly balanced or balancing, whereas in atomic physics, they're constantly being destroyed, dissolving, or unraveling because they are not balanced. They are an entropy-based physics, and they are not self-sustaining. So if you want to know about physics that's self-sustaining, you need to read Walter Russell and his cubic waveform model. What he calls his subjective mind is his consciousness, his spiritual storehouse of all knowledge, all power and all presence. That consciousness is his self, his eternal self, through which his omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence are expressed as he slowly becomes aware of their presence. Where? Within him. It's the only place that awareness exists, is within. Moving on to a small documentary on consciousness called Absolute Inclusivity. Speaking of objects, the inner and the outer. Any perceived object within itself or the subsequent space between such an object and another is indivisible, non-existent. Therefore, mobility is omnidirectional while simultaneously being omnipresent. Thus, through omnipresence, it is omniscient. Thus, through omniscience, it is omnipotent. This is really, really heavy, and it's referring to the way in which we perceive motion. Basically, mobility is omnidirectional. This is why you have very ancient sacred symbols of the four directions, because at the center of yourself is omnidirectional. You sit at the center of the cosmos, so to speak. So motion is only relatively perceived from you when you're in a form, when you're in a body. That which its very essence is unconditionally all-inclusive, contains no opposite. That is to say that being inclusive of all realities as representations of the self is unconditional love, containing the essential quality of absolute inclusivity, and does not differentiate itself into duality, does not bifurcate its beingness, or distinguish itself with dichotomy. The vastness of its all-inclusive acceptance includes even that which opposes it, denies it, rejects it, or is ignorant of it. Now, I know that is extremely heavy language, but it's the kind of thing you have to meditate on. It's It's talking about ontology, the center self, allness, the awareness of the infinite, the way in which reality is created. Walter Russell, again, this is his cubic waveform model. This is how all waves come into existence. Moving on to the spiral and the vortex, the sacred vortex of 9. Now, I'm just using very little bit of numbers here, math, to show the most common movement in nature. Why would nature choose to use the number 9 as its representative, as its way to create the ground of all form, the ground of all being? Its form is created through the spiral. So how does creation behave? We're going to talk about a system. If we're going to map something in physical terms, we are going to create a system, a way to do it. But understand, for good and ill, a system determines what is perceived, understood, and realized. On the downside, instead of being used as a tool for learning, it is molded into what eventually becomes perceived as the ultimate, unequivocal reality. The person then remains lost within it. On the high side, it engenders a personal transformation in which expression of personality and reflects the essence behind and beyond personality. Behavior emanates from an intimate connection with all creation rather than from the social conventions of ordinary realities. He's again saying how our systems dictate the way in which we objectively see. Because our systems are self-created and very rarely are they truly objective.